Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on this edition of Arirang News. I'm Ji-yeon in Seoul. We're counting down the days until the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics opens its doors to athletes and spectators from around the world. And just yesterday, a team of sports officials and ice hockey players from North Korea made their way into the South to train and inspect next month's Olympic venues and accommodation. While the two Koreas are busily preparing for the North's participation, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is planning to attend the Olympics next month, despite lingering tensions between Seoul and Tokyo. And the U.S. has also announced new sanctions aimed at denuclearizing North Korea. Before we sit down with an expert to talk more about this, let's first get a check on what's making the news at this hour with our Devin Whiting at the News Center. Hello, Devin.
Hi, Ji-yeon. Yes, a fire at a hospital and nursing home in South Korea has killed at least 37 people and injured more than 70. The fire broke out at around 7:30 this morning in the city of Miryang, Gyeongsangnam-do province. It was put out after about 2 hours. Authorities in Miryang think the fire started near the emergency room on the first floor of the main building of Sejong Hospital. There were 94 people in an adjoining nursing home, all of whom, thankfully, were safely evacuated by firefighters and hospital workers. Interior and Safety Minister Kim Bu-kyum flew to the site to oversee the response measures. It was just over a month ago that another fire in the city of Jecheon claimed 29 lives. President Moon Jae-in, meanwhile, convened an emergency meeting of his top aides earlier this Friday morning and called for all-out efforts to make sure there are no additional casualties. Here's the president.
President Moon Jae-in ordered the Prime Minister to launch a thorough investigation and take measures to prevent similar fires in the future. He also called on his government to bring together capacities to swiftly contain the damages and provide support for those affected.
The president's spokesperson, and the South Korean president also urged officials to make sure the cause of each death is accurately identified and thoroughly explained to their bereaved families. The Blue House has been operating in crisis management mode, monitoring in real time the situation and response measures in the fire-hit area in the city of Miryang. Japan is once again provoking Korea with its claims to Korea's easternmost islets of Dokdo, this time by establishing an exhibition hall on the subject in Tokyo. The South Korean government is strongly protesting the move, reminding Japan that the two countries' relations need to be based on facts. Lee Seung-jae has more.
South Korea-Japan relations continue to sour as Seoul's foreign ministry has strongly protested Japan's establishment of an exhibition hall in central Tokyo that was set up to promote Japan's claims to Korea's easternmost islets of Dokdo. The ministry issued the protest on Thursday, once again reminding Japan that Dokdo is Korean territory and that the exhibition hall must immediately be closed.
Our government strongly protests the Japanese government's opening of the Territorial Sovereignty Exhibit Hall in Tokyo to make unjustifiable claims to Dokdo, which is Korea's inherent territory. We demand it be closed immediately.
In addition, the foreign ministry called in Katsuro Kitagawa, the minister for political affairs at the Japanese embassy to South Korea, with the Seoul government also lodging their protest with Japan's foreign ministry. Earlier this week, Japan's Foreign Minister Taro Kono stated in a parliamentary speech that Dokdo is part of Japan's territory and that he will continue to make efforts to strengthen the case for Japanese ownership in the future. The latest controversy comes a day after Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe expressed his willingness to attend the opening ceremony of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in South Korea, raising optimism over the recent sour relations between the two nations. Dokdo, called Takashima in Japan, has long been a source of tension between the neighbors, as questions remain whether this latest dispute will further impact the foreign relations of the two nations. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Korea's trade ministry has responded to President Trump's recent decision to impose protective trade measures against Korean washing machines and solar panels, saying the so-called safeguards violate international trade regulations. The Korean government has already notified the World Trade Organization that it requested consultations with the U.S. over the matter. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Korea's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy expressed regret over the U.S. decision to implement safeguard measures on imported washing machines and solar panels slated for execution on February 7th. The ministry called the measures excessive and a clear violation of World Trade Organization regulations. At a meeting held Friday, the ministry said it cannot accept U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to go against the U.S. International Trade Commission's findings that imports of Korean washing machines are not a substantial cause of serious injury to domestic manufacturers. It said the import restrictions are particularly disappointing and that Korean companies are increasingly building factories in the U.S., creating new jobs and economic growth there. The ministry said it plans to come up with countermeasures with the cooperation of Korean washing machine and solar panel manufacturers, which are expected to be greatly undermined by the high tariff rates imposed on their products following the U.S. safeguard measures. The ministry has notified the WTO that it has asked the U.S. for consultations over its imposition of the measures. Under the safeguard measures, a 20% tariff will apply on the first 1.2 million imported washers in the first year, and a 50% tariff will be imposed on machines above that number. The tariffs will be reduced each year down to 16% and 40% respectively by the third year. A 30% tariff will be applied on imported solar panels after the first 2.5 gigawatts in the first year, falling to 15% by the fourth year. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Korea's up-and-coming tennis star Chung Hyeon faces the biggest moment of his life so far today. He's going up against the man widely considered the greatest tennis player in history, Roger Federer, at the semifinals of the Australian Open. Park Se-young has more.
His wide-rimmed glasses catch the crowd's attention. Korea's up-and-coming tennis star Chung Hyeon will face world number 2 Roger Federer in the Australian Open semifinals on Friday. Federer has a staggering 19 Grand Slam titles under his belt, including 5 Australian Open titles. Chung is ranked 58th in the world. The match comes as Korea is in the grips of the Chung Hyeon fever, with the nation seeing a huge jump in sales of tennis goods. The semifinal begins at 5:30 p.m. Friday Korea time, with the winner facing Croatian Marin Cilic in Sunday's final. Chung is the youngest Grand Slam semifinalist in 8 years and the lowest-ranked Australian Open semifinalist in 14 years. The 21-year-old Korean has earned nearly $711,000 in prize money for reaching the semifinals, on top of some $40,000 for reaching the quarterfinals. These amount to more than 40% of his accumulated prize money before the Australian Open. If Chung wins the match with Federer, he will become the first Asian player to reach the men's finals in the Australian Open. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
A team from North Korea is here in the south for a second day today to check out facilities for the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, where North Korean athletes will be competing next month. Today, they visit the venues for cross-country and alpine skiing. And before we sit down with an expert, our Ji-yeon tells us more about the North Korean delegation's visit.
After spending their first day of a 3-day visit in South Korea inspecting facilities in Gangneung, the 8-member North Korean delegation is in Pyeongchang on Friday. In the morning, they visited the International Broadcast Center and the accommodation facilities. In the early afternoon, they visited the Pyeongchang Olympics Stadium, where the opening and closing ceremonies of the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics will take place. They also looked around the Alpensia ski resort venue for the cross-country skiing events. 3 North Korean athletes will compete in the cross-country skiing. At the moment, the inspection team is checking out the Yongpyeong Alpine Center located in the Pyeongchang Mountain Cluster, as 3 North Korean athletes will compete in alpine skiing. A total of 22 North Korean athletes will compete in 5 disciplines, making this the largest North Korean delegation in Winter Olympic history. On Saturday, the inspection team plans to check out accommodation facilities in Seoul for the 30-member taekwondo demonstration team that Pyongyang agreed to send for the games, as well as the concert hall of a local broadcasting station. They will head back to North Korea on Saturday afternoon. With the North Korean women's ice hockey team already in the south, other North Korean athletes are expected to arrive in South Korea on February 1st, while the art troupe will arrive on February 6th. Cheerleaders, members of the taekwondo demonstration team, and journalists are scheduled to arrive on February 7th. Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And to tell us more about this, Dr. Ko Myung-hyun, a research fellow at the Yasa Institute for Policy Studies, joins us in the studio today. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so 12 North Korean ice hockey players crossed the border yesterday to start training for the Winter Olympics. So with the 8-member delegation also here for inspecting facilities and venues and accommodation for the Olympics. Now, what's the remaining schedule looking like for the two Koreas up until the Olympics?
It looks like the remaining schedule is actually pretty straightforward. We know that the North Korea is going to send a concert group scheduled to give a concert the day before the opening ceremonies on February 9th, followed by another concert on the 11th. So other than that, I think everything's all set.
All right. Now, the 8-member delegation from North Korea is led by Yoon Yong-bok, a senior-level sports ministry official from North Korea, who apparently has been in South Korea before.
Several times. He debuted in this inter-Korean sports dialogue or engagement, so to speak, back in 2003, 15 years ago. And he's been more or less a prominent fixture in this inter-Korean relationship, in sports exchanges ever since. So it's not surprising that Mr. Yoon is coming down south again, because in a way, he's a professional in handling these issues.
And a familiar person to a lot of
Definitely,
people.
yep.
All right. Well, what's interesting, though, is that there was a lot of media frenzy here in the South when Hyun Sung-wol led a delegation from North Korea to here in South Korea last weekend. But then when South Korean delegation was in North Korea for inspection, pre-inspection, between Tuesday and Thursday, there was minimal media coverage from Pyongyang. What can we make of this?
Well, we can only speculate about the motivations behind this, but then first of all, maybe the North Koreans didn't find the South Korean officials telegenic or attractive. No, I mean, I was just taking that back, so joking. No, I think it's all because, I mean, we can only speculate, but then I think North Koreans would like to keep the focus on their athletes and their performances down in South Korea, rather than shifting the focus to the North Korea. Right now, we're talking about a visit by officials from the South Korean government to inspect the facilities in Masingnyang ski resort. So that's something that North Korea would like to showcase, but I think they're waiting for the actual event when joint training between South Korean skiers and North Korean skiers will take place even pretty soon. So I think they are saving their time for that opportunity. So I don't think there's nothing nefarious or like premeditated behind this.
It's mostly all about themselves, right?
That's exactly.
Media.
I mean, yeah, that's how they've been behaving throughout history.
Now, there has also been criticism that the South Korean government has gone rather overboard in receiving the North Korean delegation. So, I mean, how should the South Korean government go about receiving further North Korean delegation for the Olympics from here on out?
I think the criticism about the South Korean government is, in a way, like overwhelming reception. Like it's actually well deserved. After all, this is Pyeongchang Olympics and it's an Olympics, so we are bringing players from around the world. So it's not so much, I mean, it's not only about inter-Korean relations, it's also about global peace and stability and celebrating sportsmanship and all that. So in that sense, I think South Korean government could have done too much in putting focus on the improvement in the inter-Korean relations. But on the other hand, we have to understand that, we have to think about the special circumstances that this Olympic is taking place. This is taking place in the Korean Peninsula, and we know that North Korea has been, state of self-isolation for a long time, and they're using the Olympics to also coming out party, so to speak. So, I mean, we understand that there's an important propaganda component behind their motivation in doing so, but at the same time, I think not just as Koreans, but part of the global community, we should support North Koreans' actions,
Right.
regardless of their motivation, because this is all about peace and celebrating sportsmanship together.
Right.
So I think when Olympics actually will start in February, I think the focus will naturally shift back to the Olympics itself.
All right. Now, much attention is still on which high-level officials from North Korea will make their way into the South for the Olympics. So who are we expecting here? And also, why is this so important for South Korea in regards to who's coming?
So this is a very important issue. I think so there's some expectation that the number 2 in the North Korean state, Chae-ryong-hae, might make an appearance at the Olympics as a special envoy for Kim Jong-un. So this is going to be important, obviously, because he's a very influential member of the North Korean regime. And there's some hope that he would bring with him a special message from Kim Jong-un to President Moon. And that message could contain important hints on what North Korea would like to do regarding the upcoming possible negotiations over North Korea's nuclear program. So for that reason alone, I think there's some expectation that Choi Ryong-hae might show up. So I think there's also a component that we're also hoping that Choi Ryong-hae shows up rather than somebody lesser of the wrestler rank. Another person that South Koreans and also the international community would like to, expect to show up in the Olympics is Kim Yo-jong, sister of Kim Jong-un. So even though her stature within the regime is probably not as high profile as Choi Ryong-hae, but we understand that she's actually part of the Kim family. So for these blood ties alone, she definitely counts with the trust of Kim Jong-un himself. So she could be another important envoy for Kim Jong-un. So I think these two names are being actually eagerly waited for by the South Korean government.
Other than bringing them, if they do make their way into the South for the Olympics, other than bringing a message from Kim Jong-un, do you think there could be some sideline meetings while they're here?
Well, there'll definitely be sideline meetings between either Choi Ryong-hae or Kim Yo-jong or somebody else high-ranked, but between them and the South Korean government. But I wouldn't expect there will be sideline meetings between North Korean envoys and the Americans. I highly doubt that, because right now the United States government has a very consistent approach towards North Korea, which is emphasizing denuclearization. And also there's a news recently that the Pentagon has promised to resume the joint military exercise that was postponed because of the Olympics. So in that sense, the United States is presenting very uncompromising stance towards the negotiations. So I would be very surprised if there's any sideline meeting between North Korea and anyone from the United States.
Now, what's interesting is that Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will be making his way to South Korea for the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. And he said his government is saying that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is planning to meet with President Moon Jae-in to discuss issues surrounding sexual slavery during World War II. Now, what could be the biggest reason behind Abe's visit to the Olympics, you think?
So first of all, we know that, the background, the background in terms of South Korea and Japan relations is that he has reached a bottom, so to speak, because the South Korean government's announcement that they would like to amend the Comfort Women Agreement between the two governments, and that has, offended the Japanese side quite a bit. So there's some talks about the Japanese government, Abe boycotting the Olympics. But then I think, that's probably an emotional kind of reaction on the part of the Japanese. But if you take a reasonable stance about this issue, I think the Japanese understand that there's a greater need to present a unified front between Japan, South Korea, and the United States when it comes to the North Korean issues. And that's an important factor for the Japanese government to consider, and also for the United States government. And so I think that's an important reason why Abe is making an appearance at Pyeongchang. But also there is another factor, which is Japan will be hosting the upcoming Summer Olympics in 2020 in Tokyo. So, this is a quid pro quo thing. If you want to have a good reception and reception in your neighboring countries, and in this case South Korea, for your own event, you better do your pay your dues for
Right.
right. So I think that's the reason why Abe understands that he has to somehow, override these concerns and probably his own irritation about the conformity agreement and come to South Korea.
But then there are concerns that perhaps Abe's visit to Korea during the Olympics could increase tensions between the two Koreas.
Yeah, so I think the reason is because Abe, when he spoke to the Japanese media about his intention to attend the games, he said that he would like to make sure that he will bring up the issue of denuclearization as well as the conformity agreement with the South Korean president. And I think there are two dimensions there. One is a domestic dimension. I think there internally and domestically in Japan right now, there's a high level of, I wouldn't really say anger, but frustration at the tit-for-tat issue of the conformity agreement,
Right.
from their point of view, it's never going away. So I think Prime Minister Abe will have to placate those domestic concerns to justify why he made the decision to attend the games. That's one. And then another one is that he really wants President Moon to make sure that this Olympics doesn't become a tool for the North Koreans to wage a propaganda campaign against postponing the joint military exercise, which is very important to the Japanese as well as the Americans. So I think there are practical considerations, but also domestic considerations behind in what he said.
Now, the U.S. also announced new sanctions on Wednesday with an aim to denuclearize North Korea and end North Korea's nuclear weapons program. Now, tell us more about these sanctions and what can we make of them?
So by themselves, the timing has been a little bit, we'll say like the party pooper,
Right.
so to speak. But then if you look into the details, it's just an extension of the sanctions regime that's been being built slowly, not slowly, but rapidly, sorry, by the United States government. We're talking about the unilateral sanctions against non-North Korean entities and individuals. The sanctions targets include not just non-North Koreans, but also Chinese companies and Russian shipping company as well, and a company in Hong Kong. So, and then the significance of it is that, first of all, it's showing that the United States government is looking into cutting off economic ties between North Korea and the rest of the world, not just by targeting North Korea itself, but also by targeting entities and individuals who do trade with North Korea. And also, if you look into the details of the designated companies, especially in the Chinese ones, they've been trading in so-called dual-use goods. Essentially, these are like civilian goods with civilian peaceful purposes, but that could be actually used for military purposes.
Okay.
So it shows that there's a high level of detail and in when it comes to United States policy of goading North Korea into this corner and cutting off its ties with the rest of the world. So in that sense, I don't think the motivation was political, but I think it was totally it's a continuation of the existing policy.
How has North Korea responded to these sanctions? Have they responded at all, or?
No, not yet.
Okay.
But then I think from their point of view, this is not a
surprise.
Not surprise, also not a deal breaker at all, because if you count the number of companies, Chinese companies and film companies in Hong Kong and Russia, elsewhere, that deal with North Korea in this kind of dual-use items, there are not just hundreds, but thousands of them. In this case, the United States government has targeted at least 3. So this is just a drop in the bucket, so to speak. So I think North Koreans understand that there are still ways for them to find the dual-use items that they need to build and continue their nuclear and missile programs. So I don't think they find that necessary for them to bring this up at this moment when they want the whole focus to be on their participation in the Pyeongchang Olympics.
So you said it's unlikely for the U.S. and North Korea to have a dialogue during the Olympics. Then how likely do you think we are likely to see a dialogue between the two countries even after the Olympics?
No, there'll be definitely no serious efforts on dialogue on either North Korea or the United States. I think there'll be serious efforts on the part of South Korea
Yes.
for wanting the two parties to sit down together and have talks. And I think these South Korean efforts will be backed up by the Chinese, because much of what Chinese are, the North Koreans are doing in a way, it's actually in tune with what the Chinese had proposed for solving this intractable problem of a North Korean missile and nuclear program, which is called so-called freeze for freeze, meaning North Korea stops carrying out the provocations in exchange for the United States and South Korea from having joint military exercises. So the Chinese have been arguing that North Korea have refrained from carrying out provocations since November 29th, when the last time when North Korea launched an ICBM.
All right.
And China has been telling the Americans to reciprocate North Korean efforts, quote unquote, for their interpretation of it. So I think the South Korean government will very much say the same thing to the Americans in this regard. So for that reason alone, there will be efforts for the two parties to sit down and talk. And then I wouldn't be surprised if there are initiatives, North Korean or American, but then South Korean or Chinese to start talks. But then direct talks between the two parties, that's going to be unlikely after the Olympics.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Oh, no, my pleasure.
And that wraps it up for today and this week, but we'll be back next week with more of the day's top stories and an in-depth look at ongoing issues here in Korea and around the world. So don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and see you soon.
A village full